Happy Wednesday, Houdat Nation, and a happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. Do we lose me?
Hear you, don't see you.
Okay, hold on. Am I back?
There you go. Technical difficulties from the jump.
Yeah. Which, why not? Because we took last week off, so after a mini vacation, why should we re-enter the media world glitch free?
All right, hold on. Wait a minute. We'll do this. Go.
Welcome, Bayou Blitz family, to this Wednesday's edition of the Bayou Blitz podcast. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your heroes for tonight. Joining me is my Venom-like anti-hero, Brendan Boylan. Back from a week-long excursion of work, travel, family functions, yeah. I guess. Yeah, as long as it's not family dysfunction, then you're okay.
Yeah. So last week I flew up. I wouldn't say quite to your neck of the woods, but I flew into Philly, so opposite side of the state. Was in Jersey, and then drove home to Charlotte by Wednesday afternoon to meet my family here. My brother graduated from Johnson & Wales Culinary Institute in Charlotte on Thursday. And then Friday went and actually took a literal vacation, which was a little nicer, just an extended weekend out to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Did the beach for the first time this year, just for a couple days.
Nice.
With Katie and her family. So it was wonderful. Now I'm back at the grind of being in the office and doing this podcast. And we got some Saints stuff to catch up on, because you saw our lovely faces for like 3 days in a row. So we said we can't ask them to see our faces for a fourth straight time in 1 week. But got to talk Saints draft. Got to talk some of the biggest roster needs after the draft. Obviously, there's going to be a second wave, third wave, whatever wave you want to call it, of free agency. But most importantly, some of that free agency started today for the New Orleans Saints, and they filled a big need with a guy that had visited New Orleans earlier in the offseason, and there was, I'd say, hope that he would be joining the New Orleans Saints in Foster Moreau, former LSU Tiger. But then he gets some quite scary news.
Yeah.
With a diagnosis of cancer. However, Moreau signs a 3-year deal with the New Orleans Saints today, and reports have it that while the Saints are going to be cautionary and they're going to take it slow, that they don't expect Moreau to miss any time, that he's going to be ready to go for training camp. Bob, first and foremost, the best news of all of that is that he's healthy, he's well, and they believe that his football career is going to be able to resume as planned. The second half of that is New Orleans fills a giant void, especially after trading away Adam Troutman, who was a disappointment to a lot of the Houdat Nation during his tenure with the New Orleans Saints.
Let's start with, like you said, the best news: his health. Foster, when he visited the Saints back in late March, during the routine physical that came along with the visit, it was revealed that he had a quote-unquote treatable form of Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that he was going to step away from football for a little while. And then I don't remember if it was, I think it was the week before the draft, it was reported that Foster was coming back to New Orleans to finish his physical with the Saints and presumably get medical treatment started. Then it was reported by our own John Hendricks of the Saints News Network earlier this week, along with other sources, that the Saints, along with several other teams, those teams were never revealed, but had contract offers on the table for Moreau. Now, that part didn't surprise me. I actually expected the Saints to sign Foster at some point and probably have him start the year on either the PUP list, physically unable to perform, or the NFI, non-football injury list, while he underwent the treatment where he wouldn't count against a roster spot. But then, like you said, upon hearing the official contract news this morning, it sounds like, at least early reports are, that that Foster might even be ready in time for mini camps and OTAs. Now we shall see. You don't know what's gonna how that's gonna transpire, what his treatment schedule is, what the effects of treatment are. Those details haven't been released. Nor should they, unless Foster himself, wishes to disclose that information. But I would say, at the very least, it's such terrific news for that young man personally, and obviously it's a great story too. I mean, he not only went to school at LSU, but attended Jesuit high school in the New Orleans area. So he's coming back home, so to speak, and he does fill a big need. He's 27. Actually, I think he already turned 27. He is or will be turning 27. 6'4", 250. Terrific inline blocker, but also a very underrated receiver. I don't know if I could call him athletic enough to be able to split out wide or even consistently in the slot like the Saints used to do with Jimmy Graham. But as you and I pointed out several times during our draft coverage, the Saints already have a guy that could do that in Juwan Johnson. They needed a bona fide two-way threat as an inline tight end, and they sure as heck got one in Foster Moreau, who also, of course, is a teammate or was a teammate with the Raiders with some guy named Derek Carr, who enjoys throwing to tight ends. So, that just opens up another facet to what suddenly looks like a very, very potent, potentially potent New Orleans Saints offense going into 2023.
Yeah, you could call them the New Orleans Raiders a little bit this year. Plenty of guys following Derek Carr out to New Orleans. Obviously, Moreau, Brian Edwards on the offensive side of the ball, as well, coming from the Oakland to Las Vegas tree, if you will. Moreau, fills a big need. I think the one thing that you and I talked about a lot during the draft process, because tight end was a position that was highlighted throughout the draft for New Orleans. Were they going to go get a guy? And even having Allen on one of those nights talked about exactly what you just said. Juwan Johnson's your Y tight end. You don't really need another big receiving threat at tight end. You looked at guys like Darnell Washington out of Georgia made a lot of sense because just this big frame could be a good inline blocker, and because of his size, poses a red zone threat. Like a pick like that made a lot of sense, while a lot of other tight ends just didn't make sense for New Orleans. And on our draft show, I talked about Adam Troutman and making the comparison. So, he could potentially fill a Josh Hill type of role, where he's an excellent inline blocker, and he's a guy that could catch 3 or 4 touchdowns a year for you just because of his size. Now, it was revealed by Troutman himself that he was the one that requested the trade from New Orleans and felt like he wasn't being utilized the correct way. Ironically, he gets traded to Denver to join Sean Payton, the guy that drafted him. And remember, Sean had excellent things to say about Troutman after the draft. The Saints traded 4 picks, 4 day 3 picks to trade back into the 3rd round in 2020 to draft Adam Troutman. And like I said, I've never been a big fan of the word bust. And especially for a 3rd round pick.
Right.
You talk about top 5. Okay, we can throw the bust word around. Even 1st round QBs, we can throw the bust word around. 3rd round tight ends, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But to say he was a disappointment in New Orleans, I think is fair. But I will be the first to say, and I said it throughout the time that we've done this show together, which is now, if you include the draft day coverage, 40-something episodes now, which is insane. But 40-something episodes, I've talked enough about how Adam Troutman had a ridiculously high expectation when he was drafted because of being the Patriot League Offensive Player of the Year, the receiving numbers that he put up, and the expectation that he was going to be the second coming of Jimmy Graham, to where if you actually watched his tape in college and you heard what the Saints coaching staff really liked about him, what was the first thing that Sean Payton said? Inline blocking. And I think the expectation level was a little too high for Troutman. Was he a disappointment? Sure. I don't think he surpassed 400, 500 yards receiving in a single season. And you definitely wanted that from him at the bare minimum. I guess one of his lone highlights as a Saint was the touchdown grab in the shutout victory in Tampa Bay. And we saw certain flashes during his time of what he could do as a receiving tight end. But it became very evident he saw himself more in that role as the number one tight end target, while the Saints did not. And he gets a chance to reunite with Sean Payton. He plays with another quarterback. You mentioned Derek Carr loves throwing the tight ends. Shoot, Russell Wilson likes throwing the tight ends too. Maybe not at the same level, but remember, even Russ had Jimmy Graham for a few years out there in Seattle. And while Graham's numbers were certainly not New Orleans, like, he did put up solid numbers as a receiving tight end in Seattle. So that's the Adam Troutman conversation. Moreau is going to be and fill that tight end to that, Josh Hill type of role. And he's going to be a beloved part of the team. I mean, you mentioned the New Orleans roots. New Orleans does not like, it's funny, the draft. They don't like drafting LSU Tigers. They don't like signing them either. Historically, they don't. Obviously, last year, they double dipped a little bit. They got Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry, but they do bring another LSU Tiger home. He's going to be a fan favorite. I already know if the Superdome opens with offensive starters week 1, and he is a starter and runs out of the tunnel, and they announce his name, LSU, and him, beating cancer. I know the Superdome is going to be very loud for Foster Moreau. So I think it's an excellent signing for New Orleans. I also think, as silly as it may sound, the more guys that you can bring in that already have the stamp of approval from Derek Carr, that have played with Derek Carr, that know the tendencies of Derek Carr, I think that's a positive thing. So to bring in a guy like this, I think on multiple facets of the spectrum, I think is a very positive move for New Orleans.
I couldn't agree more. And listen, we've talked about the Saints offseason, acquisitions all, for months now. And, some of it we've talked about tongue in cheek about, familiar faces, either to Dennis Allen or Derek Carr or both. But there is a lot to be said with that, about that. And we've had Jim Everett on our show more than a few times now. And one of the things that we consistently pick his brain about is what kind of things does a quarterback, really any player, but especially a quarterback, since they're the focal point of any team, what kind of things does a quarterback have the most difficulty adjusting to when he goes to a new franchise? And Jim has told us about, obviously you have to dive headfirst into that playbook. But being familiar and on the same page with your receivers, with your coaches, and the way the offensive coordinator or whoever the play caller is, the way they like to call the game. And even your offensive lineman, especially whichever lineman, usually the center, is in charge of the blocking adjustments during audibles and things like that. So, having Foster Moreau in, being familiar with Derek Carr, I think is absolutely huge. Derek has had now, a couple of months now, presumably to get together with, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, his other receivers, and of that receiving core, includes another familiar face that's played with Derek Carr, and Brian Edwards. So, we like to poke fun, at the familiar, ties, with all, a lot of these offseason acquisitions, but it makes sense.
Yeah, but look what New York's doing too. And I know the Jets and Aaron Rodgers in particularly has got his fair share from social media over the years, and Bob Rose included on social media and this show. And one of the things I saw that popped up was a meme of Aaron Rodgers saying in Green Bay, like, I need more weapons. And then he goes to New York and he says, New York, like, give me the weapons I was just complaining about. And he's had a lot of guys from Green Bay follow him over. And while you can poke fun and you can laugh at that, the reality of it is, especially when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who's been in the same system. I know coaches have changed, but he's been in the same system. He's had essentially the controls, if you will, if you're making the pilot reference. He's had the controls of that offense for years in Green Bay. So doesn't it make sense just to bring guys over that have experience with Aaron Rodgers? Even Randall Cobb, who, Saints fans, if you go that far back, Randall Cobb's first game in Green Bay was a nightmare for New Orleans.
Yeah.
But he's at the very tail end of his career. He may not even make the 53-man roster, but does it make a lot of sense to sign him to a one-year contract, bring him into camp, and just see what happens because he has a repertoire with Aaron Rodgers? Yeah, it does. And then you look at the Jets and you think of all the young guys that they have on their roster. Garrett Wilson, obviously, the big name. It's quicker and it's more helpful for those young guys to be able to look up to a Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, and go, okay, you've played with this guy. What is he like? What is he not like? When I'm running this route, when and how should I break? What are the little nuances of it that are going to give me the upper hand on Sundays? Those are great learning tools. Also, shout out to the New York Jets for signing TJ Luther out of Gardner-Webb. We appreciate you guys. FCS produces great football players. But that's what it boils down to. That's why New Orleans has brought in so many familiar faces, if you will. And it really, is it that many? No. Are we going to poke fun at it? Absolutely. That's our jobs. We're supposed to have fun. And that's what it's going to be. So you're going to see more of that. And as the Saints get to, yes, with the undrafted free agent and the draft picks, they're still going to have to fill out the rest of this roster. They still have plenty of roster spots open, at least for camp. And remember, this year there's only one round of cuts.
Yes.
Opposed to multiple rounds of cuts, which I don't know if I like that or not. I liked the dramaticness of it, of having multiple rounds of cuts. It played very well for HBO too with Hard Knocks, but
it did.
Keep that in mind. The Saints, it's what, 90? They go 90 to 53 now.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So they got to fill it out. There's going to be guys that are available free agents or guys that they invite to camp that have any experience with Derek Carr. It could be training camp experience and they didn't make the roster. They went to the XFL or they went to the USFL and they found success and they get an invite to camp because they have this much experience with Derek Carr. There's going to be another one or two guys that get at least a training camp invite because of that. And you guys can bookmark, tag, save whatever this link is to this video, and you can go back and reference it when they do, because I think Bob will agree with me. That's what's going to happen because you want guys to get caught up, and Derek Carr included. Just as much as we talk about these guys that are valuable to Derek Carr, do you know who's going to be the most valuable to Derek Carr himself? It's not any of those guys coming from Oakland/Las Vegas. It's the guys that have been on this team for an extended amount of time. It's going to be the Alvin Kamaras, where Derek's going to go to Alvin, hey, when we run this play or we're running a Texas route, what signal are you going to give me that tells me you're breaking in or breaking out?
Yeah.
What's going to give me that extra half second to where I know where you're going so I can get the ball in your hand and you can go make a play because that's what you're good at. Right? It's going to be guys like Michael Thomas, where it's like, all right, Mike, when we have an option route here and I see the safety doing this, I expect you to do this, but in years past, what do you do? In this offense, when we run this play, and so on and so forth, it's going to be those veterans that are going to be super valuable to Derek Carr, while the guys from Oakland, Las Vegas are going to be really valuable to the Saints and kind of blending it together.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what you're trying to find here. There are plenty of gumbo references I saw made during the draft, and I've seen a lot of like food references from John Hendricks lately. I don't know if that's because it's just John. I love John. When we come to Charlotte, we eat some good food. When he comes out to Charlotte, we have some good food. And John, I will, if you're watching right now, tweet and let the people know that I haven't missed yet. Every restaurant we've been to is a hit. But that's what we're doing. We're just making a pot of gumbo, and that's what New Orleans is trying to do. They're trying to make that perfect blend for their gumbo, and that's how they do it right there.
Yeah, and John is a foodie. When he was up here in Pittsburgh and we covered the Saint Steelers game last year, I made sure I took him to Burgatory. I suggested Permane Brothers. I was going to take him there. He ended up going himself. But there is one thing that I will say: pineapple on pizza is evil.
Nah, I'm with John on that one. I'm with
No,
John. I love Hawaiian pizza. I love
no,
it.
you guys are just wrong. Pineapple, I can sit and eat pineapple by the gigantic bowl full. I can sit and scarf down a whole large pizza by myself,
But not together.
but not together. Not
I
together.
actually I enjoy it together. It's not the go-to, but if it's there, I'm gonna eat it. It's not
Yeah,
the go-to, but if it's there, I'll eat it.
it's evil.
Okay, so what's you're the Northeastern guy. What's your perfect pizza?
Uh,
First, is it Chicago deep dish? Is it New York? Like what is your pizza?
I like the pan. I like the thicker crust. Even as thick as Sicilian crust. But it better have a good amount of sauce on it. The sauce to dough the sauce to dough ratio, is key for me. Toppings optional. I mean, I can eat just a plain cheese pizza, and be just fine with it. Again, a sauce to dough ratio is correct. But as far as toppings, in this order, pepperoni, sausage, bacon, mushroom, and then vegetables are optional. In other words, I want my chest to be hurting, my arteries to be clogged after I eat a pizza.
I was gonna say, just get you a meat lovers or a 4x4
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
whatever. That's good to know. That's good to know. I'm a Jersey boy, right? Born and raised there on the shore, so it's as thin as it gets. Give me a pie as thin as it gets. When it comes to toppings, I'm not picky, man. As long as there's banana peppers on it, we're good. I'm a pepper guy, so you throw some peppers on there, we're good. I don't really care after that.
Fair.
If you guys are ever on Jersey Shore, Pete and Elda's Bar, Carmen's Pizzeria, kind of one and the same. Go there. It's the pizza I grew up on. It's still my favorite. every time I'm up in that area. Try to make it a point to go.
We'd eat at Carmen's when friend of the show, and a radio announcer out in Las Vegas, now former volleyball doubles partner of mine. We played on the Jersey Shore a lot, and I mean a lot, in our playing days. And we ate that pizza, and I will put it as top rated pizza.
Yeah, it's up there. It's up there. I definitely got a few T-shirts too from their double extra large by yourself challenge. I don't think I could do it anymore, but when I was in like college, high school and college, that was easy. Easy peasy. You just had to be smart about it. We're talking way too much about pizza on a podcast about football, but you had to be smart about it. Is you do half and half. So your front half you'd load up with toppings, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The back half would just be plain because at that point you're just trying to scarf it down and be done with it.
Yeah.
So when the first half you thoroughly enjoy with whatever toppings you want. The second half is painful, and you try to make it as little going through, as possible. So you go, give me light cheese. Like essentially, I just want dough and sauce. Really, at that point, you guys have the best sauce in the Northeast. I had Italian while I was in Jersey last week, and Charlotte's got nothing in comparison. What do we have in Charlotte? We have Sundrop, we have Cheerwine, so we have soda, and that's it. We're not famous for anything else. But nonetheless, all right. Well, there you go. We went from gumbo to pizza. Shout out John Hendricks. If you guys ever get a chance, if John's in the city, if you guys are not in New Orleans, obviously, I mean, he's right there. But if you guys are ever on the road, and John is a super friendly guy,
Mm-hmm.
just ask John where he's eating after the game if you want some good food advice. Yeah. Or tell him, tweet at him, hey, you're in Foxborough this weekend, hit up this place, and he's gonna take your word for it because that dude can eat. We had Cabo fish taco while we were here. We had Pinky's. Been somewhere else, but we've had some good experiences with food. I already ate tonight, so now I'm hungry. We can't do this. We can't make this a regular thing, Bob. But nonetheless, let's move on from Foster Moreau and gumbo and pizza in that order, let's move over to the NFL draft and what the New Orleans Saints were able to do. Obviously, you heard us talk about it for 3 straight days. Though we weren't live on the air the whole time, it was about 14 hours of draft coverage. And I'm going to be honest, Bob, it was a little weird. This year, for me, felt easier than any other year. That was just me personally, though. It did not feel as much of a grind where I was just like downing a whole coffee pot. I was pretty awake, pretty ready to go. We were pretty on point with day 3, some of the trades that happened. We were pretty on point and getting right back on. I thought it went really well. And like I said, I wasn't as exhausted as I thought I would be.
My exhaustion hit me afterward. Day 3, as it always is for us, was a grind because it's such a rapid turnaround from a late finish after rounds 2 and 3. Happened to get the media, the articles out in the morning, and then go right back on air a little bit before noon Eastern time, to finish out the draft. So yeah, I mean it is a grueling process. As always, doing it with you was a lot of fun, the first 2 nights they seem to actually fly by. I had my pot of coffee downed, and I felt like I was chain smoking throughout round 1 for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, I mean, and let us know, folks, what you thought of our coverage too. I haven't heard too much feedback, positive or negative, from you. But we always look to you guys for improvement because you guys are our measuring stick. But yeah, I mean, doing the draft was loads of fun. As always, nobody prepares as well as you or I or our crew from the Saints News Network and Alan from Under the Dome. So I felt like we gave you viewers, a well-prepared show. We tried to approach it from an analytical point of view because all of us busted our butts, in pre-draft prep. So only one of us had 4 of the 7 picks mocked correctly, but that's all right.
Certainly wasn't either of us, right? I'm just kidding.
It was 50. It was 50% of us.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I like that.
Yeah. And honestly, I have to curtail how much I am bragging about it, because if this whole draft turns out to be a bust, that means that I'm an idiot too, because I'm the one that picked 4 of these players.
Still, I mean, I was ecstatic we got 2 last year. So you doubled it and got to 4. I think I went down to 1. I think I just got the first pick this year. So, but I also didn't publish any mock drafts this year.
True.
So you went up, I went down. You got promoted, I got relegated. That's what happened. But no, I mean, let's start from the top, right? So Brees was kind of an easy pick, I think, for a lot of people. He was mocked to the Saints by a lot of the national media, by both of us, as well, I believe. Did you have Brees in the first round?
No, I actually didn't. I had Isaiah Foskey in the first round of my first mock, and I had Mozzie Smith in the first round of my second mock. But I mentioned Brzee in both of them, saying, hey, if he was on the board, I expected him to be gone, but if he was on the board, the Saints would certainly consider him. Since I got 4 other picks right, I won't give myself credit for this one, but judges, you might want to give me a half point. I don't know.
It's more impressive you got the later round picks, though. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to mock the first round, especially when you're at the bottom of the first round, because you kind of know how the board's going to fall, or at least you can project it to fall a certain way. So that was the only one I got. So I'll take credit for that. It made a lot of sense, right? He was a good run stuffer in college. He was the number 1 recruit in the country coming out of high school. Battled an injury, an ACL injury, and then had a weird kidney thing going on and lost some weight. Obviously, a big story with his sister as well. and her passing with her battle to cancer. So there's a lot about that kid that I like. I think anytime you can battle adversity the way that he has with an ACL tear, his own kidney problems, and losing his sister, and still playing well in college with the pressure on your back of being the #1 recruit in the country coming out of high school, I think that shows a lot about his character moving forward. And while I don't foresee him being like the measuring stick for defensive tackles is always going to be Aaron Donald, right? From here on out, it's going to be Aaron Donald. I don't think he's going to be anywhere close to that level, but in terms of being a consistent producer for a long time in New Orleans, I could definitely see that should everything go well, right? No guarantees. I think it was I don't like using the word safe because that feels like it's almost like a bad thing when you say it's a safe pick. But it was a logical, that's a better word. That's a logical pick for New Orleans. It made a lot of sense. It's an easy plug and play. And especially with those 2 defensive tackles you signed in the offseason, I feel like it also helps ease his way into it as well. There's not going to be a pressure for him to sit there and play 90% of the snaps from day one. He can kind of ease his way into it as well. So I wouldn't put him up there as like a defensive rookie of the year candidate either. But he's going to be a solid piece of the rotation. And we've always applauded New Orleans, especially the Dennis Allen era as a defensive coordinator and into his head coaching career, at least in New Orleans. They've always seemed to have a really good, solid rotation of that defensive line over the years. You've had your standouts, obviously Cameron Jordan, Junior Gillette. Was that a Dennis Allen season?
No, that was Rob Ryan.
That was Rob Ryan. Okay, so
yeah,
I was gonna say Nick Fairley stood out, but that might not have been a Dennis Allen year either.
Sheldon Rankins
had good years. Onyemata had good years. Obviously, the one that got him paid. But it's been solid. I mean, we could sit there and talk about Bob, and which is my favorite, like role players, if you will, role players in the NFL are some of my favorite to talk about, opposed to the superstars, which is weird. But we could sit here, you and I, we could probably spat off since 2015, almost the last decade of Saints football, of different guys that have played on that defensive line that have made a difference. So I think he's going to slot in there really nicely.
I do too. And I think he's going to be an early contributor. Obviously, the Saints need him to be an early contributor. The defensive tackle position in general was this team's biggest weakness by far last season. And they addressed it in a big way, not only spending a first-round pick, but like you said, signing Nate Shepard and Colin Saunders, 2 big-bodied athletes that I think are going to be difference makers in the middle too. This defensive tackle rotation, and Malcolm Roach is back. This defensive tackle rotation, I think at the very least, is going to be much more athletic and much more dynamic than we've seen. Maybe since the early 2000s, the Jim Haslett, those Jim Haslett defensive lines, that created all kinds of havoc in the middle, led by Leroy Glover, but our friend Willie Whitehead was part of that rotation too. So I think that this Saints defensive line in general and defensive tackle position has the potential to be that good. But Brzee has to make an immediate impact, as does their second-round pick, the defensive end from Notre Dame, Isaiah Foskey, which kind of segues us into there. I love the pick of Foskey. He's one of the 4 that I had correct in my mock draft. Wrong round, correct player. And I think Foskey, when I watched Isaiah's film, and I said it the night of our during our draft broadcast, Isaiah's play reminded me a lot of Cam Jordan when he came into the league. And I think Isaiah is going to be counted on to have an immediate contribution as well. This team lost Marcus Davenport this offseason. They've gotten absolutely nothing from 2021 first rounder Peyton Turner. And although, Granderson and Passanio are very good role players, you need a difference maker. Especially one to complement Cam Jordan, who's going into his 13th year. And, I think Isaiah Foskey has that kind of ability. He certainly showed it in college. He was an All-American, tons of sacks, tons of statistical production, but also very, very good against the run. A little bit undersized, goes about a little bit shy of 270 on a 6'4" and a half, 6'5" frame. So he has the frame to add bulk and muscle, just as Cam did when he came out of Cal. But Foskey is already a very good run defender, which New Orleans expects out of their edge rushers, unlike some other schemes throughout the NFL. So he's going to be asked to be a factor on every down in every situation. It's going to be in a rotation, but I think that this kid potentially, we talked about Brzee as a defensive tackle. Defensive tackles, if your name's not Aaron Donald, defensive tackles don't often get a lot of notoriety because they don't fill up the stat sheet. Defensive ends have that potential. And if the defensive tackle spot is as improved as we think it would be, that's going to give a lot of opportunities for the defensive ends. We already know what Cam can do with it. To me, I'll go out on a limb here and I'll say Isaiah Foskey, because of the position that he plays, could put up the kind of statistical production that might have him in the conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Foskey's a good pick. Now, we were just talking about the depth of the interior of the defensive line. You can also now say that about the defensive end position, which I don't think you could safely say last year. There was a lot of questions with health and injuries. But to have Foskey, Carl Granderson, to know Passanio, who's one of your guys, Peyton Turner, who may be healthy, may not be healthy. But to start seeing that rotation of guys that can do, and we talked about this with the running back room, and we're about to talk about that as well, guys that do different things, right? Different ways. And I look at like a Peyton Turner, big-bodied guy, right? Can bull rush you really well, not as much of a speed guy. You look at a guy like Granderson, who has perfected some of his spin and swim moves, and it gets really creative against opposing tackles. You look at Passanio, who's a little skinnier, not as bulky, a guy that because of his height is able to play inside, play outside, and be effective in different ways. And then you throw Isaiah Foskey in there that has the potential to be a little bit of both. He could be a speed guy. He could be a power guy. Has the, like you mentioned, has the potential to add some muscle to his frame. There's a lot of depth there to go alongside Cameron Jordan now. And potential is a scary word. It's the scariest word in sports. But at least with two of those guys, you know what you're getting. Carl Granderson and Passanio. I think at this point, you know what to expect out of those guys. But you have two guys where there's a lot of potential. And that gets scary. Now, Foskey, obviously high hopes, a guy that, had a first-round grade by a lot of people that fell into the Saints' lap in the second. That's great. And then you have Peyton Turner, who a lot of people thought you reached on, but has had flashes and moments where he's shown you, very similar to Marcus Davenport, what he's capable of, but can't stay healthy and then can't put it together for a full season. When he has been healthy for stretches, he might be healthy for a 6-week stretch. You get one good game. So there's a lot of potential there. There is more depth, but I think there's some scary things as well. Let's go to one of the most, can't believe I'm saying this, one of the most solidified positions on the New Orleans Saints, where just a few months ago we said this was a huge area of concern. Let's talk about the running backs and Kendre Miller being the third-round selection for the New Orleans Saints out of TCU. You really liked this guy, but you didn't think he was going to fall to New Orleans. And you actually, I believe, said on the broadcast that it was a great pick by New Orleans because he should have been there when the Saints selected. Why did you think that?
And first of all, I Kendre Miller is another guy that I did have mocked to the Saints. And although I had him going to New Orleans in the fourth round, the way the draft started to unfold through the second and third rounds, it didn't look like the run on running backs, for lack of no pun intended, the run on running backs had started, and I thought Kendre Miller was going to be the third or fourth running back off of the board. And the Saints moved quickly and decisively. A lot of us didn't think that New Orleans would address the running back spot until early in day three, but they saw the same things that we saw. They saw these running backs coming off the board, and they jumped on Kendre Miller to grab them. And with the 71st overall pick, with the third round selection, and a lot of people, a lot of critics said, Kendre only performed 1 year at TCU. Only had 1 year of a high production. Yes and no. I mean, that 1 year was 2022, where he had 1,400 yards and 17 rushing touchdowns. And that was coming off of shared backfield duties in 2020 and 21, where he had a combined, just over 1,000 yards and 9 rushing TDs. But you have to look at the film on this guy. He's an extremely decisive one-cut runner, underrated speed, has the speed to get to the edge, but terrific size, speed, power combination with good vision. He'll hit the hole decisively. He'll get to the second level of a defense fast, and he has excellent balance and agility. He will run through first contact. He is rarely stopped for a loss. And one of the criticisms on him too was, he's unproven as a receiver. No, he's not. He was unused as a receiver because TCU just doesn't use their backs out of the backfield that often. There aren't a lot of catches to look at Kendre, to look at tape on Kendre Miller on, 29 to be precise. But look at the types of catches they were. I saw 7 one-handed catches last year alone, where he had to contort his body for an off-target throw. Sorry, Max Duggan, but it was an off-target throw, and he caught contorted his body, made the catch seamlessly, and then immediately, got back on balance to get upfield for extra yardage. He's going to have to prove that he could take on an expanded role as a receiver out of the backfield, but he has the hands and the agility to do it. I think this kid could, if it weren't for the New Orleans Saints and the fact that you have Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams there, if he were going to a team with a less proven backfield, I'd be sitting here saying, as a third round pick, he has the potential to be a day one starter, and put up potential, Pro Bowl type numbers. Now, you never see a rookie running back make the Pro Bowl anymore, but he has the potential and the ability to put up that kind of number, which goes to your point of, now you add him to Jamal Williams coming off a career year, to an Alvin Kamara knowing what he could do, and suddenly you have a very, very stacked backfield.
Absolutely. You look at what Kamara's going to be suspended, right? I mean, that's kind of what it is at this point. So even with the suspension to Kamara, you're going to have Jamal Williams, you're going to have Kirk Merritt, depending on what position he plays, right? You're going to have Kendre Miller. You're going to have Eno Benjamin. You have options, to where last year, and we talked about it all year long, was if Kamara went down, it was Taysom Hill. That was it. I know they brought guys in towards the latter part of the season. David Johnson was a Saint. It's going to be a weird one 20 years from now. Eno Benjamin got some touches.
Jordan Howard.
Oh, yeah. Jordan Howard was a one carry as a Saint, one touch, maybe. I remember complaining about that as he got brought up and he only played 2 snaps or something like that. Yeah, it was a weird backfield outside of Kamara last year. Now all of a sudden you have 3 guys who have started games at running back in the NFL, 2 that have been Pro Bowlers, And then Kendre Miller, that had a long list of awards he was up for last year. Let's see, he was first team All Big 12, Associated Press first team All Big 12, Walker Award semifinalist, Earl Campbell Tyler Rose Award semifinalist. I mean, you could go on and on. I mean, he proved to be one of the best, if not the best, running back in the Big 12, and then clearly one of the best of his draft class. Let's go ahead and move on to a guy that's going to potentially be blocking for Miller during his time in New Orleans, hopefully a little bit down the road. And Nick Saldiveri out of Old Dominion, a versatile guy who could play just about any position on the offensive line, but really slots well at offensive guard, which the Saints have question marks on after this season with the expiring contracts of Andres Pete and now the expiring contract of Cesar Ruiz, who did not have his fifth-year option picked up. What do you think about this kid out of Old Dominion?
I loved him coming into the draft, and again, that was another one. That I had the Saints mock draft, mock draft selecting. Again, right player, just like with Miller, just like with Foskey, right player, wrong round. I had the Saints mock drafting him in the 5th round. New Orleans liked him enough, liked my article enough to trade 2 day 3 picks to move up to pick Saldiveri with the very first pick of day 3 in the 4th round, 103rd overall selection. Listen, New Orleans has had a lot of luck with small school offensive linemen before. Teron Armstead, Carl Nix, Jari Evans. I mean, that's just to name a few. And if Saldiveri is anything even close to what those 3 guys are, they're getting themselves a hell of a lineman. Versatile, which is a must if you're a New Orleans offensive lineman, but played more often than not, settled into the right tackle position for Old Dominion. But I projected him inside at guard coming into the draft, and after the selection was made, a lot of the so-called experts are now saying, now jumping on board with that projection, having him move inside. He's a terrific pass blocker. 6'6", 318, but very nifty feet for a big man. Technically sound, drives off the ball well if you're talking about a run blocker. I personally would like to see him play with a little bit more of that nasty demeanor, that Trevor Penning, Kyle Turley, Teron Armstead type of demeanor. But he has the strength. And he has the athleticism to do it. And if we're right about him projecting inside, not only is Ruiz and the often injured Andres Pete going to be free agents at the end of the year, so is Calvin Throckmorton. So that's been your primary interior backup for the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know that we'll see Nick get a lot of playing time this year. It depends on when, not if, but when Andres Pete gets injured, and how well Saldiveri has shown in practice up to that point. But I very much think that this kid has the starting potential for 2024 and beyond.
Let's move to Jake Haener, quarterback, 4th round selection. Ironically, we were talking about quarterbacks on the live stream when the pick happened. We're talking about different options. And I was mentioning a guy like Malik Willis, a guy that young, middle to late round draft pick that you could potentially see becoming a starter in the long run. That was after Tennessee had selected their quarterback in the draft. Ironically, the Saints, I guess, were listening to us because they went and said, instead of trading for a guy, let's go just draft a guy we like that has some New Orleans connections. Went to Fresno State, seen with Derek Carr over the years. There's a wonderful picture of the 2 of them before a game at Fresno State. Idolized Drew Brees growing up. Picture on Instagram of him in a Reggie Bush jersey as a kid. So a New Orleans Saints fan. Wore number 9 because of Drew Brees. So there's a lot of cool connections there. But the Saints really liked him. Looking at his numbers over the year, pretty accurate passer. Does not turn the ball over a whole lot. Certainly did not draft him with the intentions of being the starting quarterback. Obviously, that's Derek Carr's job.
Mhm.
And Jameis Winston is the backup
Mhm.
for this year. And after that, I think the indications by everyone is that he won't be around. He's going to go take his talent and see what he can do elsewhere, potentially fight to be a starting quarterback in the league again. So Haener could be a couple year backup that could potentially take over the starting role in the long term. But I think this was a good pick for New Orleans to get a young guy into the quarterback room to really soak up the knowledge of two guys that have been Pro Bowlers and had success at the NFL level. What do you think of Haener and what he was able to do at Fresno State?
Yeah, and we were talking on our live broadcast. Both you and I expected the New Orleans Saints to pick a quarterback on day 3, and we talked about the fit for the system. That the quarterbacks that would be taken off the board in day 3 would have to be a fit for that particular system that they're going to. And Jake Haener certainly fits what we think is the Pete Carmichael system, the system that Drew Brees had so much success in, the system that Sean Payton designed pretty much from scratch. Some of the criticisms of Haener were that he's too small. He's not small, guys. He's short. There's a difference, vertically challenged. He's listed at 6 feet, but he's a solid 208, 210 pounds. So in other words, he's muscular. So he took a beating in college and was still productive. So that shows me that he's tough. That shows me that he could take the punishment. But to your point, he was an extremely accurate passer for Fresno State. And what stuck out to me was that a lot of times he beat defenses before the ball was even snapped, like our guy Drew Brees. Haener makes outstanding pre-snap reads and adjustments. He has good enough mobility to slide away from pressure, and make a play. And he very patiently works through his progressions in the pocket, no matter what kind of chaos is flying around him. And he has elite mechanics and release. I know his release point. If you watch him on film, his release point looked like it might have been a little unorthodox. Look closer, because his footwork was always in place. That's why he was able to remain accurate with his throws. And we talked about Salter, very unlikely to see the field much during his rookie year. If Haener sees the field, for any significant action, it's because something disastrous went wrong. But this is a developmental pick for the future, because you never know what could happen. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, when Dak Prescott was drafted in the 4th round by the Dallas Cowboys a few years back, he wasn't drafted to be the potential starter. Nobody had that kind of thought. They had a pretty darn good starter, a perennial Pro Bowl starter in Tony Romo. Now, it took an injury to Romo, but once that happened, Dak played well enough that Romo never got his job back. I'm not saying that's going to happen in New Orleans. I'm not saying I want it to happen. I mean, Derek Carr is a fabulous quarterback, and I think he'll be a fabulous fit. But I'm very intrigued at the type of tools that Jake Haener can bring to this New Orleans offense with the new weapons that they have here.
Well, I was going to say, think about Tom Brady. Bledsoe never got his job back, right? There's reasons you draft guys that you like late. Again, not the intention for them to be the starter, but you like them enough to where if something were to happen, they could be. Now, to Bob's point, catastrophic disaster would be the term I'd use if Haener sees the field at all, because that means you didn't just lose Derek Carr, but you lost Jameis Winston too. To lose two, like it or not, 2 Pro Bowl NFL quarterbacks in one season, it'd be tough. I wouldn't blame whatever the record would be at that point. Let's talk about Jordan Howden and then wrap it up with your guy, A.T. Perry, before we get to a quick dot or drop and wrap up the show. Howden is a guy that is versatile, right? You look at his snap counts from his time at Minnesota, and you think you even said it. It screams P.J. Williams, who was not re-signed by New Orleans, hasn't signed anywhere yet. Which is shocking to me because he's been very, very productive in his NFL career and has showed his versatility. At this point, I don't think he's coming back to New Orleans, especially after that pick and some of the things New Orleans has done in free agency. But an underrated piece of the Saints' success over the last 5 years, especially after he swapped to more of that hybrid nickel safety position for New Orleans, opposed to being, an outside cover corner. So props to PJ Williams. You've paved the way for some of these guys.
Yeah.
Now in New Orleans, you look at the guys that they signed in the offseason, you look at this pick. Yeah, it's a late day 3 pick, but you look at the things he did well in college, you look at your scheme and you go, you know what? I think this guy could fit really well. And that's what you're there to do on day 3 is, you pick best available, but you don't pick best available because they played a scheme that's completely different from the one that you did. You go best available based on the schemes that you play. They really liked this kid and they like the potential he has. I don't want to go on a big thing like I watched a ton of Minnesota Gophers film going into the draft because I didn't. But just seeing the couple things I did on Howden, seeing his snap counts, seeing his athleticism and his versatility, I think it makes a lot of sense. He seemed like a Dennis Allen defensive back based off of what the short amount of things that I had seen and certainly the snap counts that I saw.
Yeah, to call him a Dennis Allen type of defensive back, I think is 100% accurate. And I understood why. I didn't watch any film on Jordan Howden going into the draft. I'll be honest. I did a lot of film work. I nailed this draft pretty well, in my opinion, but I didn't watch Jordan Howden until after they made the selection. But I understood why they liked him. He shows good recognition and very good natural instincts, reads quarterbacks extremely well, terrific vision as a 2 deep safety or in off-ball coverage, a la PJ Williams. He's not the kind of guy you want locked up on a number 1 or number 2 receiver for really any period of time, or lined up as an outside corner, but he's the kind of guy that you can move around your secondary as a chess piece. And I know the New Orleans Saints safety position looks stacked on paper, but as Lee Corso, from ESPN College Football would say, not so fast, my friend. You have Tyrann Mathieu, he's a starter. You have Marcus May, he's a starter. But both of them are coming off disappointing seasons. May, like Kamara, is probably going to be suspended for at least a few games this year. And behind them, they've signed a bunch of players. They brought in Jonathan Abram. They brought in Hugo Amadi. JT Gray does return, but he's a special teamer. They brought in Lonnie Johnson. Together, all those guys probably make up what PJ Williams could do for you individually. Lonnie Johnson's the best cover guy out of the 3 or 4 guys that I've mentioned previously. Jordan Howard, if Jordan can check off multiple boxes, he could make those veteran free agents sweating bullets when it comes time for that 53-man cut down. Like you said, it's difficult to sit here and say, it's 5th round or a day 3 pick, he's going to be a difference maker. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I definitely see what New Orleans liked about him, and I could definitely see him carving out a quick role in this Saints secondary.
Absolutely. Don't forget Smoke Monday either. The guy that a lot of people were high on last year before getting hurt. Now let's wrap up their draft recap with a guy that you were screaming his name from the moment that day 3 opened. That is A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest, just a little bit up the road from where I'm located. Set a school record, 28 receiving touchdowns, was 3rd in the FBS in 2021 with 15 touchdown grabs, and then had 11 in 2022. One of 7 players with 80 receptions and 10 or more receiving touchdowns in the FBS during his time in college as well. I mean, that speaks volume. I mean, this is a guy that a lot of people did not see slipping in round 6. New Orleans saw it happen. They traded up to get him. Bob, you were high on this guy the whole time. I said that just because of the size and the speed. His mom ran track at Arizona State as well. I said he had a lot of Brandon Coleman in him, in my eyes, in terms of the size and the speed, but he had much better hands than Brandon Coleman. And this is a guy that could be the steal of the draft, perhaps, for New Orleans. They needed some big body receivers, especially with the health of Michael Thomas being up in the air. A.T. Perry might fill some boxes and then some.
Yeah, and then some. And listen, I'm as high on a second round or on a sixth round pick as a human being could possibly be, uh, because the A.T. Perry, he was a day two talent. He was the fourth player that I had mocked to the Saints correctly. Again, right player, wrong round. I had A.T. Perry going to the Saints in the third round. He dropped all the way to the sixth, and I couldn't believe it. Every time, like you said on our coverage, you were tracking it. I don't know how many times I ended up saying his name, but
Plenty.
every single pick that the Saints had until they traded to get him with the 195th overall pick, last pick of the sixth round, I do believe. You can't beat his production. Over 150 catches, in his last 2 years. 2,400 receiving yards, 26 touchdowns just in that 2 year period. So he's used to a high volume of targets in an underrated conference, the ACC. I mean, they produce a lot of talent, to the NFL every single year, and have a lot of talented top 15, top 20 type teams. He has deep speed, but he also ran the full route tree for the Demon Deacons. He has a long stride that eats up a cushion instantly against cornerbacks, and then has the speed to get them turned around on his breaks. He's a lean guy, but he plays very physically. He's listed as 6'4", 200, about 200 pounds, a couple pounds shy, I think. But he plays very physically, uses his body as a shield, like a seasoned veteran. But he has elite leaping ability, which extends an already a tremendous catch radius, outstanding tracking skills. Critics will point to his focus drops. I look for that to get cleaned up quite a bit, because again, I'm not going to repeat the statistical production that he had the last 2 years. That speaks for itself. And I just, again, it's like we said with Howden, it's difficult to sit here and say a sixth round pick is going to make a difference. But if he does, I can see why. I mean, he has the skills to have been a day two pick. And I agree. And I said, since the pick was made, that the Saints have gotten the potential steal of the draft.
I actually think he'll make an immediate impact, right? We've talked about this New Orleans Saints receivers room a lot over the last couple of weeks. Mike Thomas, Olave, Shaheed, and then it kind of drops. You're like Traquan, Brian Edwards, A.T. Perry, and then you get, your guys that have just been practice squad elevations, signed, cut, re-signed. Shout out my guy Keith Kirkwood, as always, Neptune Township's own. But guys like that, and that's no disrespect to those guys, because they are of the top 1% in their sport in the entire world. But they have never came along and proven, like, hey, I'm going to be a solidified number 4 receiver, number 5 receiver, right? And so I could see him certainly working his way into stealing some snaps from some of those guys. And I think Shaheed made plenty of progress at the end of the year as a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But if the Saints decide to do what Brendan would do and go, this guy's such a dangerous returner, we can't have him playing 60%, 70% of the offensive snaps, I could see him steal snaps there too. Maybe not as the slot guy. Maybe you get creative and you let Olave, who fits that pretty well as well, take some more snaps from inside and push Perry outside and Mike Thomas outside. Then he's got size and speed everywhere. That would be fun. And then you split Juwan Johnson out wide, and then you got all the size in the world. You just throw it up and just let somebody come down with it. But nonetheless, I do think Perry has the potential to come in and make an immediate impact. I could see him, maybe not crazy impact, but I could see a guy who gets 20 receptions, 300 yards, a couple touchdowns his rookie year. And they'll certainly use him in the red zone, simply just because of his height. I mean, you could see red zone packages that Carmichael calls that I just named. You're like, let's throw Mike Thomas out there. Let's throw Jawan out there. Let's throw A.T. Perry out there. Let's throw, they could just go crazy with height if they really wanted to. But nonetheless, Bob, real quick, we've gone over a little bit, so we'll make this quick, but I do want to get positions of need. So we're going to play dot or drop positions of need addition. All right, so
Okay.
I'll start with you. Dot or drop, the Saints still absolutely need to sign an inside linebacker for depth.
Drop. I'd like to see it happen. And there's a couple specific names. If you told me they could bring in a Quan Alexander or Rashawn Evans or Jared Davis specifically, I'd be all on board with that. But I actually don't think, and I'd like to see it happen, but I don't think it's a need as big a need as people think. Mainly because I'm a big fan of DeMarco Jackson, and I believe that they are going to use Zach Bond in the way that they successfully used Caden Ellis last year. Now, whether that works or not remains to be seen. I think DeMarco Jackson is going to have the bigger impact of the two players, frankly. And I also think it's telling that the Saints did not sign a linebacker in free agency prior to the draft or draft one when there were a few good ones available. Late in day 2, early in day 3. And I think the fact that they did not tells us that they like what they have in that room right now. That's why I'll drop it.
All right, back to you.
I'll stay on a similar position. Dot or drop. You'll have a choice here. Nick Anderson, the linebacker from Tulane, or Anthony Orji, the linebacker from Vanderbilt, both undrafted rookies. They will make the team and have an impact over Zach Bond.
Impact defensively, impact special teams, or just in general?
I would say in general, but we're leaning towards defense since we're talking about a position of need.
I'll say dot for Anderson. I think part of it's just because he's a Tulane guy and I want to see him have success. I think, and we've talked about this a lot, I think Zach Bond at this point has found his spot in the NFL, and that's okay. Not everybody's built to be an NFL starting linebacker. Not everybody's built to be an NFL starter at whatever position it is. He has found his spot being a special teamers and being a good one, right? You want a good comparison in terms of a guy that found his spot and was good at it for a couple years. Not quite the same because one was a first-round bust and one Zach Bond. Like I said, I don't like throwing the bust word around, but Stephon Anthony, 2 years of maybe he could play inside linebacker. Didn't work out, and then guess what he did for the next 5 years of his career? Special teamer in Miami, special teamer in New Orleans, and used his athleticism extremely well to be successful there. That's what I think Zach Bond is at this point. So, dot, I think Anderson will make the team. He'll make a difference. All right, last one's back and forth. Dot or drop the New Orleans Saints. Ooh, this one's going to hurt. This is an early one, so be careful. The New Orleans Saints keep Eno Benjamin on the roster.
Don't
break my heart too bad, Bob.
You know what? And I wrote a piece on, I've been covering the undrafted signings. And I really like SaRodorick Thompson from Texas Tech, the running back. And I truly think he could push Eno Benjamin. But I think the fact that you're looking at a Kamara suspension, coupled with the fact that, even though we think Kendre Miller is going to have a big impact, I don't see any reason why he won't. He's still a rookie. So I'm going to say, again, it's early. I'm going to say dot that the Saints will keep Eno Benjamin. And I give Eno the slight edge over SaRodorick for a roster spot because of his NFL experience. So I'll say dot that that Eno Benjamin makes the roster.
Okay, well, you made me happy. You didn't completely break my heart before bed. All right, last one. Throw it at me.
All right, dot or drop. Defensive end depth is still, and let me try to word this right, is still enough of a need that the Saints will pursue or should pursue Frank Clark, Yannick Ngakoue, or Jadeveon Clowney in free agency.
I still think Clowney's got two. I still think Clowney's crazy enough to throw a price tag out there. That's just not what he's worth. But um, I'll say dot for training camp, drop for regular season. Right. I think it would be smart to bring in a guy to push the younger guys at training camp, but I think that there's enough potential. We talked about that early, scary word. I think there's enough potential that those younger guys do enough to beat out a guy that's towards the end of his career. I don't think Clowney's coming to New Orleans. I didn't think he was coming to New Orleans however many years ago that was.
No, same.
But in terms of bringing in just an older guy to push, yeah, for training camp, I don't think they make the regular season 53-man roster. So dot for training camp, drop for regular season. I'm banking on potential. It's not the safest thing in the world. It's literally gambling on young kids, but I think that they'll do enough to ward off some veteran guys. Well, Bob, another good episode of the Bayou Blitz podcast. Where can everybody follow you if they don't already? Everybody should be following you, but just in case.
Just in case, I could be followed Bob Rose on Facebook, at BobbyR2613 over on Twitter. All of my work can be followed through the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter. I post all of my articles on my personal pages as well. So let me know what you think. If you're on Twitter, like them, share them, retweet them. It gives us views. If we get views, we get money. If we get money, we can continue to put on a show for you. It's a vicious political circle, but we are covering. I have been covering the undrafted free agents, undrafted rookies. Excuse me. I'm winding that up in the next day or two. Remember, tomorrow we're going to have some early schedule releases before the official schedule release at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Roger Goodell, not everything has to be a friggin' TV made for TV event. Just release the schedule and let us media members make our travel plans for what games we're going to cover. But that I'm off of my soapbox for tonight. In the meantime, follow all of us over at the Saints News Network. We'll give you our impressions of the schedule release. We'll break news to you as it comes. And then we got some, I got some fun articles in mind for after the schedule is released as well.
Yeah, you should make one like most I don't want to say travelable, if that's a word. Did I create another word? Are we still keeping track of that? Probably most entertaining road games of the season, something like that. Like what would be the best to attend? I guess something like that. Not Foxborough if it's cold and it's in December and watch. Calling it now. They're going to go to they're playing in Foxborough and it's going to be -5 whenever they play.
Look, this is Goodell. I can guarantee you that both the trip to Green Bay and the trip in Foxborough will be late November or through December. I guarantee you that.
Naturally, right. Well, for me, I like this format better. We can see both, right? So you can find me Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. Exciting stuff lined up. Traveling for work has been brutal to putting some new content out with Bottom of the Mug Productions, but we're going to have Bob Rose on here sooner than later, talk about just his story. I mean, we've heard a lot of how he got on board with Saints News. We've talked about being a professional volleyball player. We've even snuck in there that he's a Hall of Famer once or twice. So we'll talk about Bob's full story, the ups, the downs, and how everything is kind of spun around in a positive way and got Bob to where he is now, along with some other great stories. As I mentioned before, Thomas Manning, or Noel Thomas Manning III, depending on what you know him by, he's going to be debuting his podcast, The Rundown on Movies with Bottom of the Mug. Have an exciting one coming up. We're going to save it for the series finale, because I don't think it's coming back. The series finale of Ted Lasso We're going to save his interview with the cast of Ted Lasso for the season or series finale day. So you guys can check that out. That's going to be his debut, Bottom of the Mug. Really looking forward to that. He's interviewed a lot of awesome people in Hollywood over the years. We're really looking forward to that. But yeah, you can follow all that work there. Obviously, follow Bob, John, Kyle, Ross Jackson. Got to include that now. That's going to take a little bit. So no shade at you, Ross. You know that's all love here. But adding that name is it's going to take a little bit. But follow those 4 guys in the Saints News Network, especially as we get closer and closer to training camp and obviously schedule release day. Bob, you coming to Charlotte this year?
It depends when it is. If it's not around Christmas or on New Year's, I actually plan on it. So it's looking like it.
All right. Get Bob and John. I'm gonna have to clean up. I'm gonna have to start cleaning up now. Just kidding, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Bayou Blitz podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday. We'll be talking about schedule release, and we'll be talking about the latest breaking Saints news and also previewing position by position what we expect out of at least the guys on the roster now. Obviously, some more to be added soon. So until next week, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity, and we'll see you next week for the Bayou Blitz podcast.